Chance. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Olette Stonechild, and I'm here with one of my very inspiring friends. This is Lesley Hampton. She is an Anishinaabe artist and a fashion designer, and she's the member of the Temagami First Nation. And she's also has some global influence because she's lived in Australia. Now you're living in Toronto. And she often refers to herself as the third culture kid. But for those of you who don't know, Lesley's work in fashion has become quite renowned, both for her designs and for her advocacy around Indigenous storytelling, body neutrality, and making Indigenous fashion accessible for everyone. I'm super excited to have you on the show again. Thank you so much for being here. If you just want to introduce yourself to the audience. Hi.
Thanks for having me. Anin, hello. Lesley Hampton, Indigenous, Temagami First Nation in Dojaba. Hello, my name is Lesley Hampton. I'm an Anishinaabe artist and fashion designer. I'm currently based in Toronto. And I really want to bring inclusivity and diversity into fashion, as well as Indigenous representation into fashion. Because when I really started in the industry, I didn't see any of that. I didn't see curvy bodies, didn't see Indigenous bodies really taking up space in the fashion industry. So starting my brand in 2016, I really wanted to shift that and change that.
And I know the brand Lesley Hampton started in 2016, but I also realized you sewed for the first time when you were 4 years old. Is that correct?
Yes. Good research.
I think good research, right?
Yeah. My great aunt taught me to sew when I was 4. And I had this major dream of making my brother a stuffed animal. And I found that stuffed animal a few years ago, and it was basically like a flat duck looking shape. But in my head, it had all of its facets. So it was very interesting to see like how I could dream up a design, even at that young age. And it's interesting how I still remember that moment. So I think learning to sew on the machine and that discovery was so crucial to my learning and my discovery as an artist.
So you're kind of like Build-A-Bear at the age of age 4.
Should have gone into that career.
Well, how is that transition for you? Like going from like obviously when you're 4 years old to now having your full line since 2016. Did you always know you wanted to be a fashion designer, or is this something you kind of learned along the way?
My mom was always a quilter, so I always had a sewing room in my house. And being someone who moved around a lot because of my dad's career, I moved every 2.5 years growing up, from birth to 18. So to have that creative outlet, regardless of where I was living, was always very important for me to help express myself and figure out kind of all my emotions at that young age. So it was through that discovery and through playing with my hands, really, that I always had that creative outlet. But during high school, I was kind of just motivated to go the academic route. So I completed the IB program in high school and then went on to university. But I didn't really know what I wanted to study at university. I ended up applying to 13 different programs all across Canada and the US, ranging from like animal husbandry to psychology to business, fashion, as well as art and art history. And being someone who wanted to still have that connection with my parents, I chose the university closest to where they were living, which was the University of Toronto. And I studied art and art history there. So it was a mix between art history classes as well as fine art classes. And what I was noticing in those fine art classes is that everything I was creating had a conversation to do with the body, whether it was painting or drawing or sculpture or photography. It was always how I could create something that expressed the physical form in a certain way. So those wearable sculptures that I was creating, I was really excited to present those onto our runway and see what the response was. So that was really my initial input, was doing those college club runway shows during university, and then just falling in love with the craft so much that then it went on to studying fashion design at George Brown College. And then because I was so eager to change the industry and really see a place for myself, I wanted to start my brand as soon as possible. So I actually started my brand the first week I started fashion school.
Wow.
Yeah, I was too eager.
That's great, though, that drive, and also to have that vision come to you as you're learning. And one thing I love about you studying art history, and I'm sure you also maybe started seeing the similarities of like how you can connect our art forms to our stories as Indigenous people. And so why is that so important for you? Like, what does it mean to tell stories through fashion, and how do you make sure you're also integrating your story as an Anishinaabe woman?
Exactly. I really see that there's such a correlation with the conceptual background of an art piece, whether it is a 2D art form or a 3D wearable art piece. There is such a conceptual background to it. Being an artist, and specifically an Indigenous artist, we have all that knowledge and all those teachings within us that we want to put out into our artwork. And I really see where my fashion belongs is kind of between two worlds, where it has that Indigenous underlying thread, but it's presented kind of in a more contemporary style. I've shown a lot at major fashion weeks. So to bring Indigenous fashion to those fashion weeks, and to bring that conceptual basis and that sense of community to those fashion weeks, is really something that we weren't seeing in 2017, 2016 when I started. It really trickled along where everyone was really seeing that sense of community. So when I was bringing inclusive bodies to the runway, every time I did a fashion week, it was always a major viral moment because no one had seen diverse bodies on the runway before. So it really showed that sense of community. And I think that is so innate to Indigenous people.
Well, and also when you think of Indigenous fashion, like, I think you think of it almost in a different way than like mainstream fashion. Like, I think of the values that we have as Indigenous people. So oftentimes it's more of slow fashion, like sustainable. And then there's also a lineage that we're carrying. And I know some designers incorporate like beadwork that connects to like maybe their history, or like, let's say they're a Métis artist, it connects to like the Métis florals. So how would you define the difference between maybe the two worlds that you operate in? What do you think Indigenous fashion is? Compared to like mainstream fashion?
Absolutely. I think Indigenous designers we have the drive through our values. So bringing that sense of community in, not having that sense of competition that is so kind of intrinsic in fashion design and in that mainstream society where it's so cutthroat. We don't really get that in Indigenous fashion because we all want to lift each other up together. And you can see that with many brands that have existed that have brought on other people to collaborate with, or brands like I Need Retail Inc. that creates a platform to uplift other Indigenous designers. The same with Indigenous Fashion Arts Festival and Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week. We all want to grow together because we see that there is a lack and a space for us to take up space in the mainstream world. And if one of us can pave the way, then it creates a path for all of us to follow.
Yeah, so it's really coming back to like community-driven values and making sure that you're collaborating with. I know you've done collaborations with like Scott Lobano and other designers out there too that are Indigenous. What goes into your process when you're dreaming up the next collection? What does that process look like for you? Because I know right now you're wearing your new collection?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So my collection process always starts with the concept and the story that I want to say. And it often relates with something that's gone on in my life in the past like 6 months or a year, because we have to plan that far ahead for runway shows. It's always something that I want to speak to from a personal standpoint. So one of my favorite collections was a collection entitled Lithium. And it was a collection all inspired around mental health and mental wellness. So it visually presented the highs and lows of someone who was struggling with bipolar disorder. We brought mental health advocates to the runway, and they were the ones who walked for us. So it wasn't about your waist measurement being under a certain size. It was really about your mental strength to show up for yourself, show up for your diagnosis, and really kind of overcome that and show that you can be powerful regardless of what you might be going through. So moments like that were really important for me to bring to the forefront, because I feel like those conversations were lacking within the industry. And especially with runway, there's such a sense of escapism or such a sense of fantasy to runway. And I wanted the fantasy to be something that was actually obtainable, and to have fashion and moments and these amazing gowns to be obtainable for people, be be accessible. So I really try to do that within my fashion design.
I was just going to say, it sounds like your advocacy work is really integrated in each line and collection that you do. And I think that's what draws me in as a consumer, is I want to feel like I'm supporting an initiative that's goes further than just like a garment on my body. And so what has the response been like for you from consumers? Like, do you have are Indigenous people like obviously quick to support you? What has the response been like for non-Indigenous people over the years? I'm curious to know. Yeah. What the response has been to your collections.
I think there's been an overall positive response. It's been very interesting to be able to explain my clothing beyond just what the textile is or what the trend is at the moment. It's really exciting when someone interacts with my work to be able to explain the whole story and explain the good medicine and the good energy that I'm putting into the garment that then they're wearing. And I feel like a lot of the time they can feel that within the work itself. So that's very exciting. And I think it is very important to put that good medicine in and show the empowerment through fashion, because a lot of the time fashion wasn't made for us. Even though we were the first creators of fashion on this land, it's really kind of blending those two worlds and bringing something beautiful to the forefront that has that concept to it.
Yeah, I think you were one of the first designers that I supported that was Indigenous. I saw your name everywhere. And I'm actually wearing Lesley Hampton right now. We're both wearing Lesley Hampton right now. I know you've styled other people, like you styled me for ET Canada, and you also recently styled Lily Gladstone. What goes into that process when you're styling someone? Do you just kind of like look at what they're wearing and get a sense of vibe? Like, do they tell you what they want to wear? What does styling someone like actually take?
Yeah. So speaking of ET Canada, Cheryl Hickey, who was the host of ET Canada, was actually the first Canadian celebrity that I dressed. And it was in 2017. I created a relationship with her stylist, and she really took me under her wing and showed me the whole process of creating a custom garment for a celebrity and making all the fittings and being backstage at ET Canada. It was all those moments that really kind of pushed me towards that celebrity styling framework. And that really is why my brand really kind of blew up and got that recognition, is because of those celebrity styling moments. And I really couldn't have done that without those mentors that really took me under their wing, probably before I was ready. And I would still be sewing dresses the night before with the hopes that it would be for that red carpet moment. And even to this day, when I did, I recently made a dress that we sent to Lily Gladstone, and it was in the running for her Oscars moment.
Oh, wow.
And I was sewing it like right before we had to ship it off to her. And moments like that, it just still brings me so much joy, because it's the excitement of putting Indigenous fashion at the forefront on the international stage and really paving that way for other people to do so, and to have that connection with those stylists, not only locally now in Toronto, but in New York and LA, to be able to bring my fashion and Indigenous fashion to the forefront.
So you kind of get like a 2-week notice, like they're on a call, they're like, we need something for this event within this amount of days.
It depends. 2 weeks is a good timeline. Often it's like 3 days. And especially if we're shipping internationally, it takes like a day or two to even get out there. So not a long timeline at all, but that is how the fashion world works. And
that was going to be my next question is, how do you like handle the pressure that comes with those timelines, and how do you handle the pressure of also maybe being perceived? Like, I feel like your fashion is more maybe vulnerable because you're not even only speaking to your story, but you're speaking to stories within our communities and within the collective. And so how do you handle the pressure of like doing everything that you're doing right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I first started in the industry, and obviously I was representing myself as an Anishinaabe woman, I would always get the question from mainstream media, what makes your work Indigenous? And it was, my work is Indigenous because I am. I don't need to have these stereotypical motifs that non-Indigenous people think is Indigenous fashion. The work is Indigenous because I am, because of all the values that I put into the work. And I forget your second question.
How you handle the pressure with like the timelines and everything.
Yeah. When I first started my career, there was no handling of the pressure.
Right.
It was always that grind, that hustle, really trying to get the next job. And I definitely faced burnout right before COVID happened. So it was a weird moment where I was able to step back from everything with the lockdown and really kind of focus on myself, which during those first few years of the business, I really wasn't focusing on myself at all. My mental health was going down, my physical health was going down. And even if you go through the photos because they've been cataloged now from all my runway shows, you can kind of see, I can definitely see within my body and within myself the process of what I was going through with the pressures of the fashion industry. And with the pressures of figuring out who I was in the industry and who I was even as an individual. I started my brand when I was 22, so I really kind of grew up trying to make a business, grew up in the fashion industry, and really just growing up even in a city like Toronto in your early 20s, you get lost a lot.
Totally.
So I think figuring out those moments for myself and figuring out how to have a work-life balance and how to have just a balance in general has been something that's an ongoing process, but I'm really happy that I had that moment to step away from the business a little bit during lockdown and really focus on myself. And I'm so proud that I was able to start therapy, start personal training, and figure out all those aspects of myself that allows me to continue to support the brand and continue to allow the brand to thrive because I'm thriving.
Right. I think that's, so essential. And I also think that's something you don't learn until you actually go through it. Because I can relate to, at the beginning of my career, saying yes to everything just for like the exposure or to meet new people. And then you slowly burn yourself out more. And I'm curious to know, like, behind the scenes, like, what does your team look like? Because as Indigenous entrepreneurs, I think sometimes we feel so alone in what we're doing. So do you have people that support you on your team? What does those everyday routines look like at like Lesley Hampton? Like what goes on at Lesley Hampton?
My team is pretty small and it's always been pretty small. Day to day, it's myself and two other people who really kind of focus on the brand throughout the week and all the different aspects. But being a small business and being, I guess, so focused within how I want to present my brand, I take on more than I probably should. And I micromanage all of it, which is probably not the best thing, but
I can relate.
Exactly. So maybe to a fault, but I try to keep my team small because I am so particular of all the aspects. And it does take me a while to begin to trust people to take those items off my plate. So I'm very happy that I do have a really core team of 3. And one of those is including my partner, who really has allowed me to have balance in my life as well. Going back to the work-life balance, really figuring out that you can have a healthy relationship, not only with a romantic partner, but also with friendships, to figure out what those healthy relationships look like is really, I think, crucial to how I've found balance as well within being an entrepreneur and a business owner, as well as a good friend.
Yeah, it sounds like you've created like a deeper relationship to yourself and like your value system. And then in return, you've found people that also nourish like those values as well. Yeah. And I think also too, I don't know about you, but like now that I'm a little bit older and I have more lived experience, I feel like also the way I perceive success is a little bit differently than how I perceived it when I was younger. And so in your eyes, like what does success look like to you now that you're older?
Exactly. Yeah. I always used to think success was having my name in the press or having those red carpet moments. But really these days, I need the financial outcome from what I'm putting into the business. And I want to be happy at the end of the day. I want to be able to go home to a family that we have healthy relationships together, that that we enjoy being together, and it's not just stress all the time because of what the business brings in or whatnot. So I think having those healthy relationships is a sign of success for me. Really being internally happy
Yeah.
is a sign of success for me, because I do think there were times where I didn't have that because I was so lost within everything. So I think having those check-in moments with myself, and really being honest with myself on whether or not I'm happy, and if it does show that I'm happy, that would be a sign of success for me. And then just being financially able to support myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not just lean to the famous part of being rich and famous, but really focus on the rich part of being rich and famous.
Right. And I think like, I feel like when you can also uplift those around you, like that's just allowing other Indigenous people and entrepreneurs and designers to feel seen as well, which I think you've really done beautifully throughout your career, whether it's like the runway collection or the campaigns. I feel like I'm always learning about a new Indigenous person or woman or artist through your campaigns too. Can you talk a little bit about your next collection and what your next collection is all about?
Absolutely. So yeah, our next collection is entitled Alkaline, and it's really all about bringing that sense of neutrality to the fashion industry and to your bodies as a whole. I really think that not only the fashion industry, but media as a whole, really just the social and political environment at the moment is so polarizing that I wanted to create a collection and create a story that really brought people back to creator, back to soul, and really creating clothing that can calm your soul, calm your sense of self in this incredibly polarizing world. We see it on social media a lot with people fighting, and certain comments that don't allow you to feel 100% yourself. So I think to have a collection that can kind of remind you of the power that you hold and the strength that you hold is really what I want to put out within this collection.
I love that you bring up the word neutrality, because this is something that I've come into context within like the wellness community as well, in regards to like coming into a place of neutrality where you're not like swayed by your emotions really, and you have more of an objective view so that you can then decide from a place of maybe empowerment, like where you want to go.
Yeah.
Versus in my younger self, like I didn't have any neutrality whatsoever. I was very very polarized, I think, in myself. And so what does neutrality, when you say that, like what does that word mean?
Yeah, I think it comes, so when I started my brand, we were all about body positivity. And that's that overarching feeling that you always have to be happy with your body and yourself. And you there's being positive and nothing else.
Right.
Whereas in reality, we're not always like that. We have good body image days and bad body image days, depending on our hormones and then our environment. Our emotions go up and down. So I think the term neutrality for me comes to a sense of understanding yourself and understanding that you can have good body image days, bad body image days, but it's your one body, it's your one soul that you have to take care of. And being neutral to the fact that you can have these good and bad moments, these polarizing moments, but it always will return to a good state.
And what is your what is your perception of the fashion industry? Because I know we've seen these terms thrown around a lot of like, we want to create a body inclusive line. We want to create, like a body positive line. Like, do you feel like brands in the mainstream are actually being inclusive in that form? Or like, because I don't know. I feel like some brands are, like some brands do have more inclusive sizing. And then there's other brands that maybe they did it one time and then they're like, this is too difficult. I'm never doing this again.
Yeah, exactly. I am really discouraged with the fact of some brands calling it extended sizing, because it's still putting us in a category, putting us as curvy people in a category that's beyond the normal and beyond like the typical. And I'm doing air quotes for anyone who's listening to the podcast and not watching it. And I think inclusive sizing needs to be something that the brands think of right from the get-go. And I think that has to do with fashion schools teaching how to design for inclusive bodies and diverse bodies, because someone who did go through the traditional fashion education system, we're only taught to design maybe up to a size 12 or 14, whereas the typical, the standard body for North America is closer to a size 18.
Right.
So we really need to know how to design for bigger bodies and larger bodies, and figure out a way that we design for them and not just scale straight size designs up for plus size people. It's really understanding all the aspects of how a larger body might curve or bend, and really have that at the basis of the design itself. So I do think that larger kind of mainstream platforms and brands are figuring it out. And I think that has to do with the work that the body positivity movement that I was a part of in the late 2010s pushed for. And it really showed these larger brands that there is a hunger and a support for inclusive sizing as a whole in the fashion industry.
Yeah, I definitely saw more of it throughout, advertising and marketing. And I think also what I've noticed is more brands now wanting to collaborate with Indigenous designers as well.
Exactly.
Have you collaborated with a non-Indigenous brand before? And like, what does that look like? How are those conversations? Because I know sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like our value systems may be not in fully alignment. And so, have you collaborated with a non-Indigenous brand, and what do you look for before saying yes to that collaboration?
Absolutely. I haven't yet for a design collaboration, but I have contributed a lot of 2D artworks to larger brand collaborations. And for me, it needs to have a charitable give back of some sort, because there is a lot of money coming in from these larger brands for the collaborations that we're doing together. So there needs to be some sort of community-based approach to the work itself, because it's fun to create a beauty calendar or create a puzzle for a holiday.
I have
piece.
your puzzle here.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
It's really fun to create those pieces, but it needs to have we need to be focusing on the bigger picture.
Right.
And that is something that I very much focus on when I'm choosing to collaborate with these larger brands. As an artist or as a designer, it needs to have that community approach that is really intrinsic in my brand itself.
Yeah, that's something that I'm always particular about too in the conversations. I'm like, it would be great to do this one-off, but like, what's the longevity of this collaboration?
Exactly.
And I think someone that I'm currently inspired by, and I would love to know your thoughts around this collaboration with Naomi Glasses, designing with Ralph Lauren. Ralph Lauren? I'm not in the fashion world. Is that how you say it?
Ralph Lauren. Okay.
What are your thoughts on her most recent collaboration? Because now she's released two different, not two different designs, but two different collections, I guess you would call them. What are your thoughts on that collaboration?
Yeah, I am very excited about that collaboration. I think every aspect of it was done in a good way, from the manufacturing to the capturing the campaign. A lot was focused on when it came to in front of the camera as well as behind the scenes for that campaign, bringing in not only Indigenous fashion and design, but bringing Indigenous models in and Indigenous people behind the scenes is so crucial, because it's not just the face that you put on and not just the collaboration, but it's really the whole team. And it's when that behind the scenes aspect of supporting supporting our communities is forgotten. I think that's when there's a lack of understanding of why we're doing it in the first place.
And I think like her collaboration was like 2 years in the making too. Like you often don't see how much thought goes in behind that. And I think it was really done beautifully. And you can also just see the storytelling like woven throughout it, and they're beautiful garments as well.
Exactly.
What do you hope to see within the fashion world when it comes to Indigenous like representation and inclusion? What do you hope to see in the next couple of years?
Yeah. I would love to see an Indigenous brand have a namesake label that is on on caliber with all those brands that we think of when we think of fashion, Gucci, Prada, all those mainstream platforms. I want to see an Indigenous name there, whether it is Naomi Glasses or another up and coming Jamie Okuma. Like to see that put at the same level as these Eurocentric brands, I think would be so exciting, not only for Indigenous people, but really for the general public to understand and to acknowledge and interact with Indigenous fashion and see that we're not just what you have learned about in the history books that is coming from a Eurocentric point of view, but the diversity and the complexity of us as Indigenous people. I think it would be so exciting to see us as Indigenous designers take up more space in the mainstream so that more people can understand where we're coming from, our histories, our stories, and our teachings.
And do you think there's anything that non-Indigenous brands or people could be doing to support that?
I think collaborations are a great way to start. And I think with the likes of Lily Gladstone and her directing her stylist to find Indigenous designers to have her be dressed in, I think more avenues like that is really going to lead to a higher representation of Indigenous fashion. Because when Lily was presented on the cover of the Vogue magazine, us as Indigenous fashion designers, we all got an email from Vogue saying, submit your work and we'll see if it makes the cover. Okay. And that has never been the case, really, for other cover stories for magazines as big as Vogue. So I think really having people within those industries push for community to be involved, I think that is the way to go. And it's really just, it's done through community, and it's done through us paving the way and bringing other community members along too.
Well, and it almost makes me think that it shouldn't just be like Lily Gladstone is like beautiful, and I love that she's wearing all the other Indigenous designers and artists and representing, but it almost makes me think like why we don't see more non-Indigenous people also representing our stuff. Like why wouldn't you be contacted for another Vogue cover by another celebrity? I think maybe what it stems down to is non-Indigenous people. I often get asked this, and you probably get asked it way more. It's that they're like, can I wear beaded earrings? And I think there is a fine line of like maybe non-Indigenous people not knowing what's cultural appropriation and then what's actually supporting us. And so where is that line? Like what do you think, like how can non-Indigenous people know that maybe they're not culturally appropriating? What defines cultural appropriation? How do they know that maybe it is cultural appropriation? What is your advice there? Yeah,
I think it all comes down to if it's an authentically Indigenous person selling work, then it's meant for everybody.
Right.
If we're putting it on a website available to be purchased and you can research our history and know what community we come from, know our impact, I think that is the research that you have to do before purchasing the work, because where the cultural appropriation comes in is when people want to just monetize off this movement without having the cultural connection to it.
Right.
So I think if a designer is selling their work, then it is meant for the general population. And that's usually the answer I give whenever people see the work of mine and ask if anyone can wear it, if everyone can wear it. If we're selling it and we're presenting it to you, it's available for everybody. I think of like Manitoba Mucklucks when I think of that. Like their website is for everyone. They also have that like artist shop where they also feature smaller artists. And for the other Indigenous artists out there, what would your advice be to the younger group of Indigenous entrepreneurs or designers that are wanting to maybe start their own designer line, that are wanting to get more into fashion? Where should they start? Yeah. For me, it would be finding that community. Indigenous Fashion Arts Festival was a major one for me to really kind of figure out my pathway within the fashion industry. And I would also say, don't be afraid to send those random DMs on Instagram or whatnot. A lot of the major moments that I've gotten throughout my career has just been a random email or a random DM. When we were able to dress Lizzo in 2021, it was just a DM that we sent to her stylist, and we made that connection. We sent her work, albeit it took a year and a half to get onto her body after we sent it, but it happened. So I do think having that confidence in yourself as a designer, whether you are young or up and coming, it's sending and making those connections with people, because it can take you very far.
I love that it comes down to like coming back to relationships.
Exactly.
And feeling empowered in what you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think of Indigenous futurism, I think we're now at a point now where we're seeing a lot of really cool things happening within Indigenous country and Indian country. When you think of Indigenous futurism, like what do you hope to see?
Mm-hmm. I really just hope to see us take up space in the mainstream more so than we are now. I think the last few years have made a major change for us to start us having our platform. And I really hope for the future of Indigenous fashion and the future of Indigenous community as a whole is to really see our place in this world and really have the confidence and the strength to take up that space.
Mm-hmm. And what do you hope to see within Lesley Hampton? How can we support your work moving forward?
Yeah. For the next season, we're presenting it at Santa Fe Indigenous Fashion Week, as well as Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto, happening in May and June. So beyond that, I really hope to maybe follow the footsteps of Naomi Glasses and mm-hmm. work on a collaboration with a larger brand and really push the storyline that I want to see out into the world, really push it further, as well as dress more Indigenous faces and talents.
Well, I think a key to manifesting is to like state it. So like if you could state one brand right now that you want to collaborate with, who would it be?
I would love to collaborate with Alexander McQueen.
Oh, that would be.
I think that would be a very interesting moment. I did spend some time during my high school career in England, so I think growing up within the framework of London, just like McQueen did, and then just like his successors did, I think it would be a cool moment.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. And
another Indigenous face you want to design or style?
Oh. I would love to dress Quanah Chasing Horse.
Yeah, she would. I'm surprised you haven't dressed her yet.
No, I haven't yet.
Okay, there you go. We're going to make it happen. Quanah, if you're listening, Lesley Hampton on the next red carpet.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a question from one of the past guests, Asha Frost, and she wants to know, what is a dream that you had as a child that has now come true?
I think a dream that I had as a child that has kind of come to fruition now would be going back to that piece, that stuffed animal that I made when I was really young. I was making it for my brother, and it's really nice. Flash forward 20, 25 years now that I can make pieces for him that actually look like I want them to. So I think that growth and having those moments mirrored is something that I'm really proud of.
You should make him a bear for Christmas this year.
Make him a stuffed animal.
That would be so cute.
It just turns out to be a flat duck again.
Just like an upgraded version. Yeah. And what would your question be for the next guest? You'll be asking Jory Brennan.
My question for the next guest would be, what teaching did you get from your hardest moment in your life?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lesley, for joining us here on the show. Where can people follow and support everything that you're up to? Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Lesley_Hampton. Make sure you spell my first name right, Lesley. As well as you can find my work and shop my collection at lesleyhampton.com. And you can see me on the runways coming this spring. Hey, make sure you get it before it sells out. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Miigwech.